if you are interested in getting into comics or if you've barely started, what is a route that we recommend that you take? Invincible is so perfect in my opinion because it's a contained universe.
This is it. Like, this is all you have to read. It's a really easy commitment to get started with.
I've been reading it every day, sitting on the couch reading it, and then I wholeheartedly expected, I was like, all right, day I'm done, I'm buying this next comic, and it wasn't physically in store, and it crippled me.
Welcome to Backseat Directing,
where we talk about movies, TV shows, comics, and more.
We're your hosts,
Andrew
and Aaron.
We put out new episodes every Monday and Thursday.
And on this episode, it's an intro to comics.
3, 2, 1, action.
Andrew, comics is a passion that both of us share.
It's talking about third person now.
And it's something that we both got into relatively recently.
Yeah, we both got into it around the same time too, which one of the things that I want to talk about throughout this episode, amongst other things, is our like journey into the world of comic books and like what inspired us to go into it. So we'll get to that. But just off the bat, I want to say a few things that we're going to be discussing in this episode. It's our like intro into the comic book world. So we're going to talk about ourselves, what we've read, what our favorite comics are, favorite authors, favorite illustrator. We're going to talk about what we think makes a good comic, probably. We're going to talk about, I think one of the biggest things too is if you are interested in getting into comics or if you've barely started, what is a route that we recommend that you take for finding books, finding something that you'll like, and how should you go about delving into this world? Because it can be intimidating.
Yeah, definitely, especially with some series or characters have been created decades ago, and there's so much content around the different universes and characters within that universe and stuff. So it can be a little bit overwhelming when you're getting started. Sometimes I get a little overwhelmed when we go to a comic book store and I don't know like which stories are good. Like I don't want to spend my money on something that won't be good, sometimes the comic stores have them like in a plastic wrap like this one. So like you can't look through the comic.
So see if you're interested in the art.
Right. So there's a lot of different factors that can go into like overwhelming you when you're trying to get into comics. So hopefully our story of how we got into comics and then also like our recommendations now that we're kind of in this world will help you discover the best path for you.
Yeah, I think two of these things are kind of like uniquely intertwined. So that's kind of where I want to start, unless you have a different avenue.
Nope, I'm for it.
I want to talk about how I got into comic books and how I recommend going about looking for new books or starting.
Yeah.
So the way that I originally got into reading comic books was I watched the television series Invincible on Prime Video, and I loved the shit out of it. I was obsessed with the show. I watched it again.
That is an understatement, guys.
I watched it again immediately, back to back, after watching it, and I knew there were comics for it, and I wanted to know the rest of the story. And I think this is a way a lot of people get involved in reading manga or comic books or source material is they see something from popular culture, like a show or movie, that they just have a hunger for. Like, if you're like me and you've ever just been hungry for like more Batman and you feel like you've watched all the movies and shows and it's like, what do I do now? Comic books have such a wealth of stories that you can read. And the cool thing about comic books too is like they can tell stories that would never necessarily make it to the big screen. So you can like read these really unique special stories, maybe really gory, maybe really unique and weird. Like Ether Somewhere Down Here is super weird. I hardly see that turning into like a show or a movie, but comics have the opportunity to kind of expand on that stuff more because there's a lower barrier to entry for a comic than, a big production TV show. But for me personally, after I watched Invincible and wanted to know more, I bought this compendium right here, the first compendium for Invincible. That's the way I prefer to read comic books. It's most cost effective for me because, just to explain, a compendium, which can also be called like an omnibus, is a huge collection of comics. So this first compendium for Invincible. Number one, it holds 47 issues for Invincible. So you can read 47 issues for a resale price of $60. You can get it even cheaper online, Amazon or other retailers like Abe Books.
It's like 45 right now.
So you can
52 maybe.
So that if you're gonna read all 47, that's the cheapest way to do it. You can buy single issues for like $3-4.
So an issue itself is like typically around 25, 24 pages. So when you have 45 issues, 47 issues, you know, you get this big, huge book that will last you a lot of time and entertainment. But there's other ways to go about it. Like maybe you're not sure if you're going to like it, so you don't want to spend $60 on this huge book. So maybe you just get a volume, which holds maybe 12 issues. And then it's a lower commitment out of the gate to where you can see if this is a story that you like or not.
Yeah, you have a bunch of different options when you're like entering into this world. I decided to buy the omnibus because I knew I was so obsessed with the story. I knew I wanted to read more, but you can get what's called a trade paperback. And a lot of times those run in the range of the area of like $20, like $16 to $25. dollars And you can get, you know, a couple issues in that. You can get like some with as little as 5, some with more like 10 issues, 15. So you can read in a couple different formats. You can also purchase, this is a paperback omnibus. So if you look along the side of it, you can see creases from when me and Aaron were reading it. And maybe we stopped at a certain point for a while. But you can purchase a hardcover omnibus, a hardcover paperback if you want something with more shelf life and maybe something a little hardier. Aaron's showing one right here. It's got a little bit more life to it. You have to take care of these books a little more carefully when they're a paperback. So you have all those options. You can spend less and I prefer to spend less and focus on like just reading the story and absorbing the story. I'm consider myself like a little bit less of a collector, even though like these all in front of me are mine. And I have like, this is, I don't know, a tenth of the books that I have at home.
Yeah. Some of them are behind you there. Yeah.
So like, I mean, my collection's all spread out. I do collect them, but I'm collecting the stories. I'm not collecting like the paper. So
you collect the ones that you enjoy.
Yeah. So here's what I would recommend that you do. This is my recommendation. Maybe Aaron's is the same. We'll find out. But if you're just getting into comics or you want to get into them, pick something you like. You can read comic books for Star Wars. You can read Invincible. You can read DC and Marvel. I really, really love Image comics. Image tells like a lot of out there stories and unique stories. I think Invincible's an incredible starter comic book. Whatever way you want to go into reading it, whether it's omnibus, trade paperback, single issues, Invincible is so perfect in my opinion because it's a contained universe within 144 issues. You don't need to read any previous verses. You don't need to read Golden Age, Silver Age. You don't need to read Flashpoint. You don't need to read all this other stuff. Invincible is, you get what you see. You can read from issue 1 to 144 and get the entire story from beginning to end.
It's very straightforward.
Yeah,
it's like these 3 huge compendiums, that's the story and that's it. You don't have to know, and you don't have to have any other back knowledge, you know? Like sometimes Marvel and DC comics can feel a little overwhelming because there's multiple runs. There's different writers, different stories. Some are connected. Some are in a restart, a reboot of the whole universe. So it's kind of hard to tell like where the stories are. Some are just one shoot stories. You know?
Other characters show up and they might not really handhold you and tell you anything about their backstory.
So Invincible's really good for a first timer because it's literally that's all you need.
Every character in here they'll introduce to you like it's the first time that they've ever been on the page. So it's an incredible comic for that. And then Robert Kirkman, the inventor of the story, just does such a good job of keeping you engrossed, in my opinion, throughout. Me and Aaron do notice some slow parts in there. I mean, like any story that goes for 144 issues. Yeah. I mean, we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of pages.
There's some ups and highs and lows, ups and downs, you know, like there's really high highs and not very low lows.
Yeah. So I think it keeps you pretty well throughout.
Yeah.
But
the one problem about reading Invincible, especially if it's your first time reading a comic book, is it will ruin every other comic book you ever read.
It sets the bar so high.
Because everything else you read just won't be as good.
Yeah.
At least in our eyes.
Invincible is just such a good starter comic because of the fact that it's so self-contained. I mean, they talk about it just at the San Diego Comic-Con 2023. Robert Kirkman, the author of Invincible, talks about how they wanted the story to be self-contained. So when it ends, it literally ends. That is the ending of the plot of Mark Grayson as Invincible. Whereas if, like Aaron said, if you're reading Batman or Superman, generally the way it works is that story gets passed on to a new creative team when it comes to the end of the run. Batman being written by Scott Snyder, he's going to pass it off to the next creative team, and they're going to start Batman over again. It's going to seemingly go into infinity.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about that with Invincible. You have when you read a trilogy of like a paperback novel, that is what you get in Invincible. The whole story is in there. Every character you meet for the first time. Where I'd recommend going from there, this is where I want to see if you disagree with me, because I know you love Invincible like I do. But where I'd go from reading your first comic that you pick, whatever it is, Star Wars, Invincible, Marvel, DC, I would take what you liked about that story and then go apply that to your search. So if you really like the story, look at the author and then look them up online and see what other things they wrote. If you really love the art, look up the illustrator and look other things that they drew. If you really love the mystery, look mystery comics and look at other stories and read those descriptions. And then the other end of that that's really easy and obvious is go to a comic book store, pick up something off the shelf and peruse it and say, the back of this has a description that looks interesting. The artwork inside looks interesting. And grab that and run with it.
If you go to a big bookstore too, sometimes they'll have like a comic book section. And a lot of times there, they won't have comic books that are wrapped in plastic. So you can actually flip through the pages, maybe read a few pages, look at the art to really see if it's a story. It's kind of like watching a trailer. You're just kind of skimming through, see if it's going to be something that you're interested in. But let's go into how I discovered comics, which is very similar to how Andrew did. And that is through the gateway drug, Invincible.
It's potent.
So I actually didn't watch Invincible when it first came out. I watched it probably 8 months or so after it came out. And Andrew kept telling me like, oh, it's awesome, blah, blah, blah. And I just remember like seeing the trailers and it just seemed like a little over the top, maybe a little gory, just extra, and I watched it at one night and I was just like, all right, I'm going to put something on TV, just kind of have it on, whatever, no big deal. It's Invincible. Like how good could it be? I watched that whole season right there and then.
And he never doubted me again.
Finished, done. And I was like, oh my gosh, I want more. And during this time of me watching Invincible was when Andrew was getting into the comics of Invincible and he bought his first compendium and he was telling me about it. And I was like, dude, that is crazy. You just spent $50-$60 on this gigantic book. Like, I don't read books, Andrew. I watch movies. And he read it and he's like, dude, this is the best thing I've ever read. And he quickly bought the second and then the third. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, is the story really that good?
I actually remember fiending for it because the comic book store that I went to buy the first one, the second one was out of stock. And I was like, I thought I was going to show up here today and leave with it. And it was like, if I ordered it online, I had to wait a couple of days. And I was like,
you did order it online,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I remember we were training for a triathlon. And I remember being at the pool and you're like, I think this is coming in today. I don't know. Like, and I was like, anxious about it.
What am I going to do? Like, I was like, I've been reading it every day, sitting on the couch reading it. And then I wholeheartely expected, I was like, all right, day I'm done. I'm buying this next comic. And it wasn't physically in store and it crippled me. It was buried in my psyche.
So the cool thing about comics too is that you can go at your own pace. Like Andrew read these 3 compendiums really fast and I took a lot longer. But for me, it was a good pace. Like I was able to read an issue or 2 a night. Some nights when the story was really going or I had some more free time, read 10 issues,
I would read like 20 issues a night faithfully.
Yeah. So like you can go at your own pace and that's what I like about comics. Like if you only have time for one issue, like that's only 25 pages.
It's also really nice to read a comic before bed and know that you're like doing your eyes a favor compared to looking at a screen before bed.
Yeah, for sure. So we both started with Invincible, but then from Invincible, we kind of went our different ways in terms of like which comics we've read.
So I know for a fact this next comic I went to is right over here. I took the route I explained and I looked up Robert Kirkman and I was like, oh crap, this guy wrote Walking Dead and I already loved that show. So I got Walking Dead and so this is one omnibus of Walking Dead. I have the other 3 at home. All the Walking Dead comics because I freaking love Robert Kirkman. And that's the next thing that I went into. And it worked so well for me. I was like, those are still, to this day, 2 of my 3 favorite stories are Invincible and Walking Dead because they're so good. So what was the very next comic that you read?
It was either Saga or Why the Last Man, because that was a book that you were on at the time. And I like the fact that I could just check a book out from Andrew's library and I didn't have
I
to
like
pay
it too a lot.
Like it was a lot of fun. Like he got to share something that he really enjoyed and I got to experience something that he enjoyed. So
Dude, it's so cool I love we used to call it my comic library, not as much anymore, but it would basically be like,
what book do you want to check out today?
you're borrowing one of my books to read, and in exchange, I get to be able to talk about the comic with somebody. Whereas like nobody else has really taken me up on my open offer to like read my comics in the same way that you have.
I've read a lot of the similar ones or same ones that you have, but I maybe just haven't finished them like you did. Like kind of I'm a momentum reader. Pretty much with anything, video games too. Like I'll get into a habit, but then if something messes up my routine, it's really hard for me to start back up again.
I'm a momentum reader too. I think in a different sense, but like when I started Luther Strode, I really liked it and I read the entire series in 24 hours.
Dang. Yeah. So for me, the next books that I enjoyed the most after Invincible are the Avatar: The Last Airbender series. These take place right after the show. And I recently watched the show for the first time, like not too far before I started reading these. I think I finished Korra before I started reading these, but there's a bunch of like stories in here. These are each little omnibuses that you would say that collect this story. The first one that came out is The Promise. This is where it takes place literally right after the series ends and then skips ahead like 1 year. And it kind of goes back and forth between Aang and Zuko. And Zuko is asking Aang to promise to kill him if he gets too far out of the line because he doesn't want to follow in the same steps as his dad, the Fire Lord. So there's a hard dilemma that Aang is put in where he doesn't want to harm his friend, but at the same time, he has the obligation to protect the people that he's vowed to serve as the Avatar. And that's just the first one. And something that I really like about these is that they're small. They're easily consumed. They're easy to travel with. Like one of these I read during a camping trip. It was easy to take with me. I didn't have this huge book. But then I also just love the art. And we didn't talk about the art in Invincible that much, but top tier. But second to that, I think this is my favorite. Like it's just so simplistic, but detailed at the same time. And the movement of Aang when he's fighting is very dynamic, just like the show. Like for me, it literally felt like I was watching the show still by reading these comics. And the same creators are involved in the creation of the comics, so it all feels the same, feels connected. There is 5 of these for the Aang gang, and then there's more for Korra. And this is the first book of Korra, and I haven't read it yet. So this is my kind of to be continued if it's good or not. But if it's anything like the last Airbender, it's gonna be great.
Yeah, my current read is American Gods by Neil Gaiman. What's your current read?
So I just bought 4 or 5 new comics, so I haven't really picked any of them up yet. I literally just kind of got them this week, so I don't know where I'm gonna go from here. Kind of just depends.
Yeah, I think something you touched on was illustrators. So I want to talk about our favorite authors and illustrators. So we can start with our favorite artists. My favorite illustrator is, I feel like this is going to be a very basic conversation that we're about to have.
Yep.
But my favorite artists and illustrators are
same.
The creative team behind Invincible. Robert Kirkman is my favorite author. As I talked about, I went from Invincible to Walking Dead, and from there I went to Outcast, which I originally read online and then purchased the compendium that you can see here on the screen if you're watching. Outcast is another story kind of about angels and demons, another brainchild from Robert Kirkman. So I love the way that he tells stories. I love that they're dark. And then in terms of art, Ryan Ottley's artwork in Invincible is just absolutely peak, top tier. The way he draws Invincible, the way he draws the conquest fight, the way that he just covers his characters in blood, and like it is the imagery is just astounding. Like it shocked me when I turned the page to I've never felt the shock of turning a page to a full issue spread more than the work of Ryan Ottley. Like I turn the page and it's just like some big climactic
Like hits you in the
punched,
gut, right? Yeah.
a literal punch through the stomach with blood spraying everywhere. Like when spoiler alert for Invincible. Skip forward.
Do it. Don't do it.
I won't say it.
Don't do it.
Fine, I won't say it. But when he draws somebody punching through somebody else, like that, I literally was gasping in my seat multiple different instances.
I felt like with Invincible and the Avatar Last Airbender comics, I spent a lot of time just looking at the art before I flipped the page. You know, like it wasn't like, oh, I'm just trying to get through this, you know, read the story, find out what happens. But I like sat in the moment, you know, and that's a cool experience that comics offer, you know?
Yeah. Story-wise, another author that I really like is Brian K. Vaughan, because that's the author behind Why the Last Man, which is my third favorite series. My top three is Invincible, Walking Dead, Why the Last Man. And then Brian K. Vaughan also did Saga. So Saga's like this Romeo and Juliet space opera epic, and Why the Last Man is like this what if story about what if all the men on Earth drop dead and there's just one left named Yorick Brown. And conceptually, Why the Last Man is just so interesting. But what really makes me love it is the character relationships, especially between 355 and Yorick Brown. And like, I was ready to cry at the end of Why the Last Man just because of like the character dynamics. And I feel like I really fell in love with people on the page, like maybe in a way that I haven't since like reading Harry Potter as a child. So I think that Brian K. Vaughan is another top tier author that I definitely recommend. But there's a slew of people I'd recommend. I mean, on here, Tom Taylor, right? For Deceased, Tom Taylor tells awesome stories. Charles Soule, who did 8 Billion Genies, tells awesome stories too. 8 Billion Genies right here as well.
Yeah, I would say maybe if these big stories are a little intimidating, 8 Billion Genies is a good place to start if you want something that's a little less intimidating. It's only 8 issues. It's just this book right here, which is very digestible, especially for someone just getting into comics. Andrew, why don't you explain what this is about while I actually unwrap this out of plastic for the first time?
Unwrapping. So, 8 Billion Genies is about when the world reaches the population number of 8 billion. In this hypothetical world, suddenly everybody gets a genie that pops up in front of them and is willing to grant them one wish. So the wishes are basically unlimited, except you can't wish for more wishes, is how I remember it.
Yes.
I bought this story in single issues, so I kind of started it a long time ago. But Aaron just recently picked up this collection that holds the whole story that looks freaking stunningly beautiful. The art in this by Ryan Brown is chef's kiss, beautiful. Like, just look at the... I don't even want to know what to call it. Like, it's like a watercolor nature of the way that they use these blues and purples and blacks. The genies are super stunning, but people basically every issue it shows you that it starts out 8 seconds, then 8 minutes, then 8 days, 8 weeks from the inception of the genies. And the world, it also shows you the population, that new book smell. It shows you the population of the world declining because people just making reckless haymaker wishes. People wishing that the world was an ice cream cone, wishing that they had endless money. Like, but it also puts a crazy philosophical twist on the idea of what you would wish for if you could have anything. You see, like, what a person who truly loves their family will wish for. You see a little kid wish for their mom to come back to life. You see a parent. One of the most astounding wishes I saw was a parent wishing that his kids had to ask his permission before their wish because he wants them to make it's a selfless decision because he's sacrificing his wish to make sure that his kids don't waste theirs. One of his kids wishes for like endless toys or something like that, but the other 2 kids get to keep their wish and they can use it for something with more maturity, you know, more impact, and he prevents them from wasting it. It's so unique, the thought behind it.
The bartender that we meet in the beginning, he makes a very useful and practical wish that ends up really benefiting him in the long run.
That wish is what inspired me to purchase the first issue and read the story because I saw a video online of what his wish was, and it's just such a unique character to make, and he made it immediately. Wish. Yeah. Like, very interesting character.
Yeah. And then you see like people that didn't really understand what was going on. They make like an off wish, you know, like they basically wasted their wish.
The wish gives you insight into so much insight into who the characters are.
Yeah. And again, like this is it. Like, this is all you have to read. It's a really easy commitment to get started with.
This is a story that had me like outside of reading the comic, walking around asking everybody I knew, what they would wish for if they could have one wish. And it's like, you hear beautiful things, you hear things that let you know more about people. Somebody might tell you, I wish that I had endless money. My grandmother said that she wished my grandfather would be back alive. Like, you hear things that like tell you what that person that you love tells you what they want most in the world. And it's like, it's such a beautiful story, I think, for that reason. And it starts a lot of cool conversations.
I'm excited to finish it. I think I read the first 2 or 3 issues because you were buying them again by single issues. But then I think I stopped there. I don't think you ever told me that you bought any further. But it sounds like you have the whole collection.
I do have all of them. I also have like a variant cover of like 1 or 2 of them, like, because they did alternate covers that I thought looked really cool.
Yeah.
It's the only thing I've collected in single issue format.
Yeah, I was gonna say too that I probably won't ever buy a single issue comic because I like having the complete story, or I like having a big portion of the story all at once. That way I can again like have that momentum.
Yeah. The other thing I want to
story.
suggest related to that, because we've talked a lot about like these one-shot stories, like 8 Billion Genies, you only need those 8 issues. And like I said before, Image is amazing. Image is the company that produces Invincible, that produces 8 Billion Genies, that produces Walking Dead. So Image is really cool. Boom Studios is really cool, which produces Something is Killing the Children, I have right here on my right. It's not just Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
But if you want to read what's popular, what general audiences know about Marvel and DC, if you want to read superheroes, you can still get contained stories like we talked about Deceased. You can pick out an Elseworld story like Deceased, or like there's a DC vampire storyline where everybody gets vampirized. Those stories are out of the main canon. They're a contained story. And yes, Deceased is going to have people pop up like Deathstroke, and it's going to have people pop up like Booster Gold. You might not recognize them right away, but it's not inherently necessary to know everything about that character to just enjoy the story in these Elseworld stories. You don't have to read like concurrent issues. It's all in there. So you still can read Marvel and DC if that's what you really want to read. We're not telling you like, hey, Invincible's the only route to go if you don't want to have to like do research and buy the big book of Marvel. And you can still pick out, and you can pick out it like Grant Gustin's run on Batman and just accept what you don't understand. You can do that too. Like we recently talked about this in another episode we filmed, which was about D&D. Just pick what looks fun to you. If you want to go in and pick the cover that looks the coolest, freaking do it. Have a good time. Like, just pick like what you're interested in. Have a good time reading it.
Yeah, no, that's all good advice. Like, I just got this Spider-Man comic. You know,
It looks cool.
yeah,
looks
and
cool.
that's why I got it.
And we love Across the Spider-Verse. We love Miles.
Exactly. It's about Miles Morales, and we're kind of coming off of the Across the Spider-Verse high, you know, of how good that movie was. So I'm excited to learn more about the character in a different medium, you know, and we also have the video game coming out this year as well. So I don't know. It's just another way to experience the character, you know, like this isn't the whole story, you know.
Who's the author on there? Oh, Bendis. See, I've wanted to read Bendis for like a long time. I hear really good things about his runs.
Yeah, and the art looked really cool, so I got it.
Yeah, I mean, so like down here, this Flashpoint anniversary omnibus, that has like a bunch of tie-in issues that really bogged me down and like kind of made me want to quit reading it. So I feel like sometimes it's definitely better to just let yourself go and have fun. Like maybe you don't have to read all the tie-in issues. Read, you know, what you want to read. Don't feel pressured from people.
Yeah, something that I really like to do is get comics that are based off of movies or shows, whether it's an extension of said movie or show, or if it's a direct interpretation of the movie or show. Like Dune, for example. This is a exact recreation of the book Dune. So
That's
like
awesome.
It's literally the same as the book, but now there's pictures, and I like pictures. So this is going to be really cool to read and watch the movie to be able to compare and contrast.
So we've touched also on my top 3 favorite comics, but I want to hear what your top 3 favorite comics are.
Okay, first one, obvious, we already talked about it. Invincible, can't top it. I haven't found a comic book that has given me the same joy. But
Just the shock factor moments, isn't it? Like
it's crazy.
The big highs are.
But then also the dialogue during those moments is like top tier.
I feel like Conquest is one of the best characters ever. Just in my mind.
Yes, I'm so excited to see it on the big screen, you know, in our home theaters. My second favorite comic book experience is probably the Avatar Last Airbender. They're just really easy to read. The art's really simple but detailed, like I already said. And the stories are just as in depth as the shows, you know? And yeah, I really enjoyed going through that. My third one, that's maybe a little bit more tricky. I enjoyed some of the like Batman ones that we've read,
Like
or
Year One.
yeah, or the few issues of Daredevil that we've read. So I don't know if I have an exact like third one. I will say that I did like these comics here, Radiant Black. These were being said to be like, if you're missing Invincible, check out these. And I went in expecting it to be like Invincible, and it wasn't quite at that level. So I was a little disappointed, and kind of stopped reading them. However, I would like to revisit the series once more of the books come out and I can get like the full book, or at least one that encapsulates more, and go from there, because it was a cool and interesting story. I was just had too high of expectations.
Because somebody said it was like Invincible
Yeah.
too much.
But it was still a really good series, and I would like to revisit that. I'm excited to read the Stranger Things comic that I just got. This has stories that are like in between the seasons and some off stories and stuff. So I think it'll be cool to learn more about the characters that we see on screen. But yeah, there's a lot. I really do enjoy 8 Billion Genies. I just can't have it on my top 3 list because I haven't finished it yet.
Fair enough. I think that when you're getting into comics, like I think we've given a lot of the best advice, which is just to have fun. But I think in my eyes, what I would definitely tell myself going back is like, look through Dark Horse, Image Comics, and Boom Studios. And you can go on their website and look at their titles, and you can kind of read descriptions and see what looks fun. And I think that's a lot easier gateway than like the Moon Knight comic, the volume that we got to read for the show when the show came out was great.
Yeah, that was a good one.
But like sometimes I feel like the more traditional route of comics has kind of like turned me away, like in sense of just feeling a little bit lost. Like reading the Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo run on Batman, I was like, I didn't feel like it had like the most clarity for me without having read like all the Batman comics that preceded it. So that's I think really good entry level is just like those stories are so much fun.
Yeah, and do what you're doing right now. Watch videos, find people who are talking about comics, and when they're describing when they're describing a comic that you think you might be interested, dive into that more. That's what I did. When we first got into comics and I didn't have Invincible anymore, I watched hours of comic book material on YouTube and stuff and found different storylines that I would be interested in. Didn't mean I bought the comics right away, but now I know of the storylines in my head. So if I'm looking for that story, I know like what these stories are about and how they were received by the audience.
Yeah, I watched The Omnibus Collector a lot, and I think he's the one that really got me infatuated with building like a big collection.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and you have the bookshelves that are like from the ground to the ceiling like him, and you got all the big omnibus collections and stuff. So yeah, you're like a baby version of him.
I love these books. They're like my children's.
Yeah, Andrew didn't bring some of his comics because he didn't want them to get ruined.
I wanted to bring The Dark Knight Returns, which is like probably my favorite Batman comics, and I have this cool like collector's edition set. But yeah, it's nerve-wracking, daunting.
Too precious.
And then American Gods, I didn't want to bring. That book is like beautiful, like, and it's all white. So I literally wrapped these books in blankets to bring them with me. It makes me nervous to travel with them. I'm obviously not like a super purist. Like you can see little tears and stuff in my books, but that doesn't mean I want them to go into disrepair,
Right. Yeah. I think it's cool when books have a little bit of wear and tear, like it tells the story of it being read.
Yeah. Some of them are near perfect, and then some of them are like Why the Last Man has like frustrating little rips in it. And
all the ones that I have borrowed have been heavily used.
He's shit talking me right now. You see that?
Sorry.
I don't generally give anything away unless I've already read it. So
I was more so inferring that I'm the one who messed them up.
oh, okay.
Not that you did.
I think you take pretty good care of the books, but
I try.
I would much rather have somebody give a book back to me that they read with a nick in it or a bend in it than like return it to me unread. My joy in the comic book library that I have is wanting to share the conversations about these stories with people. And it's hard to get that sometimes because not as many people read comics as like I would like.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it seems like the smallest form of media that's consumed.
Yeah, I mean, after reading something like Why the Last Man, like I have to go on the internet to find somebody to talk about Why the Last Man with. Like I don't, and maybe there's people out there that have like seen the one season of the show that exists, but I've never met another person that has read Why the Last Man. Also, I want to give a shout out to
I read half of the first one.
shut up. I want to give a shout out to David too. He's been on the show before, and I call him my comic book uncle. He made a lot of recommendations to me, including Saga. So he's read a lot of comics, and it's helpful to have a friend that can make suggestions.
Yeah, David, if you're listening to this, maybe put a list of some of the comics that you recommend in the comments below. It'd be cool to see like what comics you enjoy and recommend.
I know
if you don't want to do that, that's fine too, I guess.
I know he loves X-Men, and he loves like Green Lantern.
Yeah, he seems very knowledgeable about his comic books. So it's always fun to talk about a new form of medium, that you can experience a story.
Big takeaway: you don't have to have read every comic. Don't let people keep comic books from you. You can just pick up a Batman comic that looks cool and start reading it if you want to. If somebody tells you otherwise, they can shut up.
Yeah. There's also ways to read comics online too. I know Marvel has like an app or whatever that you can subscribe to, and you have access to a bunch of Marvel comics. Andrew read a few comics online.
Yeah.
Like it's maybe an easier way for you to get started rather than spending $30-$40 on a big, huge compendium.
Yeah. I read comics online. I've read manga online. My first entry into like physical copies of manga was reading Blue Lock. Now I have Blue Lock, Vinland Saga, Hunter x Hunter, One Punch Man. So
I feel like it's difficult for me to read something on my phone though because I get distracted. Like I like having the book so I can just focus on the book, put my phone to the side.
I like owning everything that I read. I just like having it, and it's so much fun for me to.
I know we want to get the Ultimate Spider-Man.
Yeah, but it's so expensive.
I was like, Andrew, do you want to just go halfsies on it? And you were like, nope. I want to own it myself.
Strong no.
It's basically the same thing.
I'd like to read it together, but I want full ownership. I want it in my house all the time. I want all of them. So
that's fine with me. I'll let him go in debt, and I'll enjoy the same story.
He'll reap the rewards.
I offered.
I'm not splitting custody of my comic books.
I offered. All right. Anything else, Andrew, that you want to say about comic books or getting into comics or anything?
I definitely would like to request anybody who's watching this, give us your comic book recommendations below. Let us know what comics you like. Comment on these comic books that we talked about today. I mean, do you like Invincible? Have you never read it? Like, tell us what we should read. We want to talk about comics, and also make sure to share our podcast with friends and family because it helps us out a ton, especially if you made it this far into the episode.
Yeah, we've had a few people message us saying that they've shared it with a friend or something, and then they've subscribed or whatever. Like, that's how we grow this community more and more, is people sharing and talking with their friends about the things that we like to talk about, so adding to the conversation only makes things more fun. So we appreciate the support. Again, we post new episodes every Monday and Thursday on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast, everywhere you get your podcasts. We're posting every single day on social media. We have merch. Andrew's wearing one of the shirts right there. We're coming out with different variations of the shirts as well in the future. We have a D&D campaign that's going to be a huge production. That's going to be 2 really long episodes that we've put a lot of work into, and we're very excited. That's in celebration of our 100th episode, as well as our 1-year anniversary. So I'm so excited that we've made it a year, and I'm thankful to the audience for listening and enjoying the podcast, but also to Andrew to sit down and talk to me for hours about movies, TV shows, comics, and more. And
that's a wrap.